So the way these interviews have kind of been working is I have this little I made a whole outline kind of thing, and I usually go through it, and it's just questions based off of the survey in relative chronological order. They're a little bit out of order because I have some by subject as well.
Oh, that's fine. I don't exactly remember every question on the survey, though.
Yeah, no, it's, neither do I at this point. And so I guess I just want to ask first of all, is there anything that you don't want to talk about?
No, I'm pretty open about talking about anything now.
Okay. And in terms of your name, so I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself at one point. If you don't want your name to be used, you can choose a new name. You can say as much of your name as you want. You I don't know what you want to do with that.
Oh, I'm fine with my name. It's no problem.
Okay, and in terms of location, do you want me to just say Canada?
You can say I live in Montreal.
Okay. Um, okay, and so afterwards, I'm going to be editing the video and I'll send it to you, and you can tell me if you want me to change anything or not about it.
Alright, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you want to just go right into it?
Sure.
Okay, so could you please introduce yourself? And so that'd be like your name, where you're from in China, just anything you want to add about that.
Okay. I'm Megan Freeman. I'm from Montreal, but I was born in Chengzhou, China, at the age of 9 months. I'm currently 22 and I'm studying at Concordia University.
And how would you describe your personality?
I would say I'm very introverted and a bit shy. When I make friends, though, they tend to last a number of years. I'm very studious, and when I have a lot of interests, and when I am interested in something, I tend to stay interested and focused on that for a long while.
Do you have any fun facts about yourself?
I've I've been in a I've been in several vehicle accidents, but none of them have actually been in a car.
Oh, like what?
I've been in a bus accident, I've been in a boating accident, been in bike accidents, but I've never been in a car accident.
Oh, wow. So would you talk about just the details surrounding your adoption, like when your parents went, how long it took them, were you adopted in a group, just things like that?
Okay. My parents, before I was adopted, had adopted my sister at 2 months, and in 1993, I guess, they made an application to adopt me, and they were only accepted in 1995 to come get me when I was 9 months old. They did this with a group of people of about nine of our parents. It's interesting to note that my dad actually didn't come to get me when I was adopted, but only my mom came.
And are you still in touch with anyone in that group?
Um, Not recently, but a few months back, I spoke to one of the people I was adopted with. Most people that were adopted actually live in rural areas of Quebec, whereas I live in the city. So the last time I met all of them all together in the group was about 12 years ago.
Um, okay. So, would you talk about your family a little bit? You can be as specific or as non-specific as you'd like to be.
Okay. Is there any? Well, my sister still lives at home. We now have a closer relationship, but we tend to not talk about the personal, but more the general. I think that actually goes with all my family, that we tend to talk about more general than personal feelings. My parents are both music teachers, and my sister's finished a master's in researching. So we tend to be more busy, but we tend to still have our family dinners together and talk about issues, worldly issues, and things that have happened throughout our day, but we tend to not necessarily talk about the very emotional, but more of the specific, like if our day was good or what happened at school.
So do you think having a sibling who's also been adopted has been beneficial?
Yes, because it helps to know that I'm not the only one who doesn't look like our parents, and although we're not blood related, we still have lived together throughout almost all of our life. So, despite that, we share similarities of looks, racial background, and historical and cultural backgrounds. And I think it's easier to relate to her than if I were to have a sibling that did not look like me.
So I asked you who in your family you think you're closest to, and you said you don't really feel close to anyone. Would you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. I don't necessarily feel that close to them because we have very differing personalities. An example, my interests completely differ from my sister. So although we're more comfortable with each other, we can talk about the general. Like I don't feel comfortable talking to her about things that have affected me personally, and it might just be how we were raised, but our feelings are sometimes not easily conveyed. It's a bit better now, but I definitely would never feel completely comfortable to talk about all my if I've had issues or I'm upset with my family, because at times it perceives to being adopted, and I have fear, especially with my parents, to not hurt their feelings. So I think that thus leaves a barrier in communicating and feeling completely comfortable in sharing and being close with each other.
Mm-hmm. And so I asked you also if race played a role in your family dynamics, and you said yes.
Like there's racial issues.
You said yes because despite my parents believing the world is now colorblind, it remains to be untrue.
I say that because although like I live in a predominantly like Caucasian neighborhood, and my parents don't believe that racism exists. When I'm at school or taking transportation to school, I will encounter people who ask about my race, or they'll ask about why, like bad stereotypes about being Chinese, or they'll ask like one example is whenever I order something or I ask a question in public, a question I often get is like a surprise that I have perfect English or French. So there's an assumption that because I'm Chinese, I'm an immigrant here that doesn't understand English or French very well, and my cultural background is more limited than in comparison to a North American background.
Mm-hmm.
If you understand what I mean, what I'm basically saying is people assume that because I'm Chinese, I don't understand every social context that happens here, mm-hmm. and believe that like I'm more adapted to a Chinese social context and background.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean I've had that too. I think most adoptees get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least the ones I've talked to, everyone seems to have stories about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about China right now as a country?
Like in current events or just now personally? like despite the events that have happened? Like I know that China now has gotten rid of the one-child policy.
Both actually.
Oh, okay. So I'll start with the one-child policy. In some ways, I'm happy that it's no longer in place, but it also saddens me because that could imply that if I was alive during that, if I was younger during that time of the one-child policy no longer existing, I have to come to question, like, would my life be completely different? Like, would I still be with my birth parents, or was I left in an orphanage because of like socioeconomic like reasons, whereas they could not afford me, rather than like the laws preventing them to have me, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And how I feel about China now, I actually went to visit China a couple of years ago when I was in high school, and at the time I had a very negative outlook on it, as the tour guide once at the time explained China as one big happy family, and I completely disagreed with that because when he was saying that, I looked out the bus window and I saw two children begging for money, and I was like, I was disheartened because those children were evidently not actually happy and being taken care of. So I think it's a blind message that is given to say that China's one happy family, where they actually have significant social issues when it comes to caring for children and keeping them safe, happy, and well fed. But then I was angry. Now I'm less upset with it, and because I've come to realize that although it bothers me that I don't exactly know my background of like why I was put in an orphanage or not, I've come to realize that I doubt that the people who gave birth to me did not care about me. I actually think quite the contrary, that they did care. I mean, it's hard to think that they could have a baby inside of them for 9 months and not think about me at all. So, although I'm upset that I don't know my birth parents, I understand that there might be many reasons behind why they were unable to keep me.
And so how do you feel about like birth parents, about like finding them, or birth siblings and so on, biological siblings?
I've actually had, like, for lack of a better word, I've had like fantasy thinkings of like what it would be like if I met them, and I'm not sure if I would ever want to meet, say, my birth parents, because I think it would be tense, it would be uncomfortable, and if it was if I felt the reason why they gave me up wasn't understandable, I think it would leave a lot of hurt. Whereas I think I would be more accepting of meeting a sibling because maybe they were put in an orphanage as well, or they were actually still with my birth parents. But I think there would be more of a closer bond that way, just because they could potentially have a similar experience that I've had.
And so, how did your parents tell you were adopted?
I don't think, from what I remember, they actually told my sister and I. I think we came to that conclusion because we realized that we didn't really look like our parents. If they did tell us that I was adopted, it must have been at a very young age, because there's never been a time that I didn't know I wasn't adopted.
Mm-hmm. And so, what are the ways in which you think your parents have handled the subject of adoption with you and your sister that have been like the most impactful, like positive or negative? Because you've rated them, I think it was a 2 out of 10.
Oh yeah, they don't. They are very bad at discussing adoption. My parents tried before to have children, and they were unable to conceive, and they tend to not want to talk about that past about our pre-adoptions. So like when it comes to adoption, they'll not discuss um, really a lot about it because I think there's a bit of guilt that they wanted to have children before my sister and I. And another thing I think is that they tend to say, like, if I ask about it, they'll just say, oh, we always wanted you. But I think in contrary that if they always, how could they always have wanted us if they previously tried to have children, you know? If that makes sense. So when it comes to asking about, like, about our adoption, they tend to be very reluctant to share.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think that reluctancy has affected you?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, I think their reluctancy has thus made me reluctant to talk and share my feelings with them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's been a barrier now of, like, sharing emotional feelings and sentiments.
So in your family, you have your immediate family. Are you close to any of your extended family?
No. Most of our extended family lives quite far away, or there's significant age gaps in it. My sister and I have 3 cousins. They're either like 12, 15 years older than us, or about 10 years younger than us.
So you live in Montreal, and I was wondering if you felt how you felt about the diversity there and how that may have had an impact on your experience.
It's interesting because before although I live in Montreal. When I was growing up, I was homeschooled, so I was very limited with the people I encountered, and most of the people I actually encountered were Caucasian. So growing up, I was mainly around a very not diverse group of people. But after I started going to high school and going to university and college, I found that I was happy of this diversity because it felt like it wasn't just solely Caucasian people, but there was many people of different backgrounds, people who've also been adopted, or people who've had immigration, interesting and fascinating and heartwarming immigration stories to Canada. So as I've grown up, I've been more accepting and happy that Montreal is such a diverse city to live in.
So do you think that you'll be staying in Montreal, or will be moving at some point?
As I continue to study, I have the potential of actually leaving Montreal. But as I've been growing up and living in such a diverse city, I don't think I'd be able to live in a small town city where there isn't a high social diversity. So if I were to study, I think I would look for cities that are high in social diversity.
So in terms of schooling, would you talk about just your school experience?
Okay, as I said before, homeschooling, I wasn't really integrated with many people, and the people I knew were very limited, so homeschooling left me a bit. I didn't have a lot of social interaction between people my age. When I went to high school, it was a lot different. I would say fitting in and getting along was a lot harder than I expected. I tended to have to explain a lot why my name is incredibly English and not anywhere similar to something Chinese sounding, for lack of a better word. I got a lot of questions about adoption, and in high school it was upsetting, but as I progressed after high school, my experience got a lot better, where people tended to not define me based on who I looked like or where I was from, but rather who I am as a person. So my studies, aside from the socialization, my studies have never really changed throughout the time that I've started school and have progressed in school.
Okay. How did you choose your college and university?
When I was in high school, as I said, I tend to live in a very Caucasian area. So there was a couple of colleges I could choose from. There was one that was within my community, like close to my city, which is John Abbott College. It tends to be where all the people from the high schools nearby go to. And the other stage I had a choice to go to was Dawson College, which is in the city of Montreal, and it is a lot more diverse. And I wanted to change from this, from being like all close with people from within the area and going to a school that had was more accepting, more diverse, and more open, for lack of a better word. Like they were accepting of different cultures, nationalities, etc.
And so, in terms of academic interests, you said so in elementary school it was math, and then in terms of like middle school and high school, it kind of branched out a bit more into like English and arts and histories and things like that. And then in college, you said sociology, theology, and women's studies. And I was wondering if you could talk about that kind of progression.
Okay, well, I find when I was in elementary studies, I wasn't very strong in languages or other types of learning. So, and I was really good at math, so I liked the things that I was good at. And then when I went to high school, math became less of an importance to me because I started to learn to communicate. I started to learn more subjects. There's more variety of things to study. And then when I went to college and university, the branches of study opened up even more. I looked at, I'm very interested in societal and societal things, and because I have observed so many different societies, and I've experienced so many different things. I've experienced being homeschooling, I've experienced going to school, I've experienced living in North America. I've come from a society that's completely different from North America society. So now I'm very interested in why we act the way we do, and why does society influence us to do these things. I study women's studies also because I am a woman of color, and I find it interesting that feminism can vary based on race and perspective. I find women issues continue to be a serious thing that our society faces today. We still face discrimination and misogyny, and I think it's important to understand where these roots come from. theology is the study of religion. Although I'm not a religious person, I am very interested on why religion like drives a person to act a certain way. So all of the things I study is basically very societal. I just want to understand why people act the way we do within like social contexts.
And so you come from a very educated family. Did you feel any pressure from like your parents or your sister or so on in terms of education?
Actually, surprisingly, not. My parents are not do not pressure my sister and I to do well in school at all. I find a lot of my pressure is personal pressure to do well. I want to do well because personally because I want to be seen as somebody as studious and hardworking, and I don't know if this is my own personal pressure, like a side effect of like a Chinese stereotype, but I want to do well to prove that I'm somebody who's I guess worthy or like a hard worker, for lack of a better word. I want to be like noticed for my intelligence and my hard work.
And so touching on stereotypes, do you think that like Asian stereotypes have affected you in schooling? Because usually they're like, oh yeah, Asians love math, or they're really good at school, or things like that.
In high school, yes, I had those stereotypes. I've had people ask me those stereotypes. Now more, I tend to just joke about those stereotypes. I don't think they are true. I think it's based on the individual's willingness to work hard. I know that there are social pressures from family to do well, but I think to do naturally well, I think it's the individual. It's based on the individual. I tend to joke with my friends that like, oh, if you sit beside me, you'll become smart, but I don't actually mean it.
Um, and so, what is your friend group like in terms of like diversity or interests?
A lot of my friends aren't based on like racial backgrounds, but tend to be more on interests that I have. So I have high interests in like social activism. So my friends will tend to be those who are interested in social activism. Um, Back in high school, my friend group actually was predominantly Caucasian, whereas now my friend group varies from like people of color to Caucasians to queer people, etc., etc. It really just depends on if they have similar interests as I do.
And so, do you think being Asian has affected your social life in any way?
Um, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think in some ways it has, and in some ways it hasn't. I would like to think my friends have been fairly colorblind, but that's not true because I've still, for being Asian, have experienced questions about my race and being adopted and my parents. So I think in that sense, the starting point of my friendships with people have been based on my race.
And so, how do you feel about that?
I think in some ways it sucks that like people have to base it off of that at first, but I've come to realize part of it is just curiosity of like of difference. Because I'm so different from some people, I think they're curious on it.
Okay, so in terms of then career, you said your career aspiration was a social worker, and I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. I now it's changing to actually be potentially something educational, like counseling, but it's still within the social context of similarity of social work. I'd like to help. I'm very like because I'm studying sociology. I'm very interested in social issues, and I think that it although like there's a wide scale of social issues and it can affect globally, I noticed that even within our own society, there's social issues that need to be fixed, and I think social work is the best way to aid and improve these social problems within society. I mean, I think politics can work in changing legislation, but I think it needs to be more specific. I think there needs to be people more involved with those specific social issues in order to change society.
And so, you stated before that your parents are both in education, and I was wondering, do you feel like that's affected you now that you're saying that you're interested in education as well?
I think it has. My parents, though, are not in the educational, social, and aspects, but they're actually music teachers. So I think although like they have influenced me slightly in education, our interests in what we want to educate in is completely different.
And so I asked you if you felt that your career choice has been affected by adoption or influence, and you said yes. And do you want to talk about that?
Yes, sure. I said yes because as an individual who has had so many differences in society, I think it there are people similar to what I've experienced and have had issues similar to what I've felt, and I think um, although like I cannot relate to everyone on every level, um, because I've had so many differences, I can relate and help people on those levels of if they've been adopted or been homeschooled or had previous religious ties and left them type of thing. So I have the ability to relate to people who've had similar issues. I cannot be the same as those people, but I can understand issues that people have gone through that have been similar to mine.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought. I was thinking about it.
It's okay.
Oh, right. Sorry. What was I gonna say? Oh, right. So this urge to help people, I've seen it, in like many adoptees in general. It seems to be this constant feeling that they really want to help people, and I was wondering where you think that feeling stems from.
Um, I think it actually has to do partially with being adopted. Uh, I was once told, and perhaps this is partially true, less so now, that people who tend to want to help people um, have been people who have not really like had the help they needed, or that they had their own issues to address that they haven't addressed themselves. And although in the past I definitely think I did not address a lot of the issues of me being adopted, now that I have, I feel like I'm actually better and more capable of helping people. And I think it has originated with being adopted because I didn't get the help that I needed when I was younger about being adopted. I mean, I have my parents. We had a friend group that was consisted of all adoptees. However, it was interesting to note that none of us actually talked about being adopted in that group. It seemed like an unwritten rule by everyone that we did not talk about being adopted because it was something that negative of our life.
Mm-hmm. And
like what happened before was thought to be bad, whereas like now what we have now is good type of thing. However, I think there's a downfall of that because a lot of us that I know I was adopted with have faced like significant mental health issues, and it's disappointing because our families didn't seem to want to discuss that adoption part of us.
Mm-hmm. And so do you think you've been able to find a community in which you've been able to talk about it, or outlets in which you're able to talk about it more, or not so much?
Yes, I think actually the group that we're both part of has helped a lot. Although I don't talk a lot on the Facebook group, I read what people say, and I find it interesting that there are people like me who have similar feelings of discontent about being adopted, or like had experiences where people who have said very insensitive things about being adopted, and I was like, oh, finally I have people that are willing to talk about this and are just as discontent as I am with the insensitive comments that we experience in our day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of your overall adoption experience, I asked you what you would rate it out of 10, and you gave it a 1. And I was wondering if you would talk about that.
Although I think that's changed now. I would say I'm ambivalent. It's more like a 5 now. I mean, I think I've seen the positives of it and the negatives of it, and I think at the time when I kind of filled out the form, I was a bit depressed. But now I see myself as more positive about it because of the fact that although I mourn the things that I've lost in my life that I could have had, I also appreciate the fact that I have a great life now, and I've made friends that there was no way that I think I would have ever met them if I wasn't adopted. And as much as I'm at times I'm sad that at being the not necessarily the first choice my parents have had, I've had parents that have evidently and obviously cared for me a great deal.
So you said that yourself you would not adopt. Could you explain that?
As much as I think there are benefits in adopting, and some people have great experiences, I have issues with adoption personally because I have fear that if I were to have a child that were adopted, I would never want them to have the same feelings of adoption that I had. And I think that's the big root of why I would not adopt. And I think there's a big misconception about adoption. When I talk to people get the idea that like parents, it's go to the orphanage and look at a child and be like, that's the kid I want. Whereas that isn't really the case on how it works. Although in movies you kind of see like that's how it is, and maybe in more westernized orphanages in the past that's how it happened, but it's not how it happens, and it's not a big choice on who your parents get.
So I asked you if you would say you like being a Chinese adoptee, and you said not really.
Well, ideally, I don't like being classified as that because I don't want people to I don't want to be defined on being adopted. I want to be defined as who I am as a person and what I believe in and what I stand for. And I find that as soon as I tell people I'm adopted, or that or if I tell people I'm homeschooled, or whatever difference I have, I find that that's what they define me as, and not on what I believe in or what I think is important. So I don't like identifying as a Chinese adoptee because I don't think it should be an important part of a defining feature of who I am.
I mean, so while you say that you don't think it should be a defining feature of yourself, do you think that in any way it is?
In the end, as much as I don't want it to be, it is a defining feature of who I am. Unfortunately, I think who I am as a person wouldn't have happened if I wasn't adopted. I think I would have been a completely different person if I wasn't adopted.
So how would you prefer people to among that topic? So you don't want it to define you. So how, in general, like when people first see someone, they come up with all the assumptions, and you say you have issues with them, uh, just assuming things based off your Asian appearance. And so I guess how would you like them to first see you? What kind of first impression would you like people to have of you?
That I'm a hard worker, that I care about the environment, or I care about school, I care about uh, social issues. But unfortunately, that I don't think that will ever be the case, because first impressions are always based on looks.
So you said that other adoptees have had mental health issues related to their adoption and so on, and I asked you if you had some as well. Would you be willing to talk about that?
Yes. For a long time, I was very depressed, and I was actually diagnosed with depression. That I was upset with being adopted, and I was very unhappy with my self. I didn't have a lot of self worth. I didn't think, because I wasn't wanted when by my birth parents, why would anyone see value in me? And it took me a long time to realize that there is value in myself, despite the people who gave birth to me didn't want me. It's still difficult to talk about sometimes, but my perspective has definitely, and feelings have definitely changed. That just because I wasn't wanted by somebody, one family, I was wanted by somebody else. And with the friendships I've made, they don't care about who I am or who I was, or for being adopted. They want to be my friend because of who I
Um, and so how have you taken all of your experiences and really, I guess, how have you formed your identity as an Asian woman?
am. It's weird. I actually don't think about being Chinese often unless somebody points it out. And I think that's part of the benefit of, and in some ways, disadvantage of being adopted by Caucasian parents, is you don't really think about your race until it's brought up. So the only way I think I've built around being an Asian woman is by all the discrimination and adversity I've faced about being Asian, and people bringing up the fact that I'm Asian. And it just makes me want to prove that, like, that's not a defining feature of me. Although I'm an Asian woman, I'm more than just that. I'm somebody who believes in hard work. I believe in social issues. I believe in, like, other than just the stereotypes of what people think Asians are interested in.
And so I asked you if you had interest in like experiencing Chinese culture or learning about it, and you said yes. And I was wondering how you feel about your interactions with China, or how you're going to feel about them in the future, something like that.
Well, I'm a lot more comfortable with Chinese culture now, and my family always participates in Chinese New Year, although it's probably not as accurate as we'd like it to be. When I was growing up, there was Chinese groups where my parents would send us to, if we were interested into like Chinese dancing or learning Chinese. But apart from that, more recently, I haven't really been involved with that. There was courses offered to take Chinese in college, but my schedule wouldn't allow it, although it was an interest of mine to potentially take it.
Um, and so what kind of things do you do outside of just academics, like hobbies or things like that?
I I'm a bit of an exercise junkie. I like to go to the gym. I don't really lift weights, but I'm very interested in like running and potentially in the future doing marathons. Other things I'm very interested in is I like to read more but not necessarily studious things. I like to read sci-fi. Some what else do I like to do? I used to play sports and do a lot of recreational activities, but I haven't been able to more recently because of a knee injury. Other things I like to do is I like to hang out with friends and cook.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
It's funny, but I'm a big Italian food fan, so I like to make pastas with different types of Italian sauces.
Nice. Okay, so um, this is a question that I've been asking all adoptees near the end of the interview. And it's just if you had advice for other adoptees or for parents of adoptees or just, um, yeah, just things you'd say in general to them if someone asked you, what would you say to them?
Um, to parents, I would definitely say to try and be more accommodating and accepting when your child has questions about being adopted, and to not take it personally. Like generally, children and people who are adopted are just generally curious about their background, and it's not an intention to hurt the parent. And I think that's something my parents failed to realize. To other adoptees, I think it's like um, for some they find it very hard to find solutions and struggle with self-worth. And I think it's something that I would say is that you are actually wanted. It's just maybe difficult to see. Despite one, for all you know, your birth parents could have incredibly wanted you. They just perhaps there's this issue that they can't, and they still think about you every day potentially. Who knows?
And so, do you have anything to add about anything we've said? Or
No, not really. I actually think I'm losing my voice for talking too much. I feel, although you're the interviewer, I feel like I've talked more than I should have.
oh no, the whole point is to get you to talk.
I realize that, but it's just the thing. I'm like, oh, I think I've talked too much. I should stop talking. But I think the more information for you, it actually is probably more beneficial.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So the way I've been doing these interviews is I kind of don't talk very much at all, even if I think I want to say something, just because I try to focus on on like the person on the other end.
Yeah, of course, that's part of the purpose of a researcher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing you're doing more of a qualitative based research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean that concludes all the questions that I have. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask or?
Although I know you can't express like specifics, but have with the people you've interviewed, have you faced similar answers as the ones I've given you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so actually, I will. I can send you the link to the website I have right now. It's not complete yet, but it's got a lot of the data on it and so on, and it's got a few of the interviews already up. I need to actually tweak one of them though, because a girl emailed me and said she wanted me to take something out. I just haven't gotten to it because I need to do it, but it's just I've had a lot of other things to do. And overall, your answers are like which one specifically would you be more curious if people had the same thing to say or not?
I guess like feelings of adoption type of thing.
Yeah, definitely feelings. And there are some people whose parents seem a lot more open to talk about it, and some parents who aren't. And it really ranges the spectrum on that. And I think it really does affect the adoptee and how they feel about the subject or feel about themselves in terms of it. And so it seems like the parents who are more open to talking about it, the adoptees seem to have a much more positive experience.
Yeah, sure.
Where the ones who are more closed off, the adoptees, have a little it's more of an issue, I guess, or it's a more of a negative view. But I find that also sometimes there are other factors that can make it negative or positive because there are still people who go, oh yeah, the parents won't talk about it, but they still feel that they've had a positive experience and just through other factors like community and things like that. And then there are parents who talk about it, but adoptees still feel alone or something like that.
Okay. My last question, as it pertains similar. How do your adopted parents feel of your research?
Oh,
Are they more open or are they more closed about it?
So I have a single mom,
Okay.
and so she has always been completely open about adoption, and she lets me feel about however I want to feel about it, and she's open about everything, and we actually talk about it quite a lot. And whenever I have a question, she's completely open to it.
Great.
Yeah, it's been a very positive experience in terms of that. She kind of just lets me set the tone for how I want to feel about it and accommodates.
Okay. So that's excellent. Anyways, I hope my information has helped you, but I think I need to go get some breakfast.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I do too. Thank you for letting me interview you.
No problem. All right. I'll see you
Bye.
around.